And thank you all for coming. I know there's stiff competition right now with the other presentation, so thank you all for coming to our presentation on emerging adults and problem gambling. My name is Gloria Wong-Padoongpatt. I gave Carol the permission not to say it because she was scared she was going to mispronounce it. Padoongpatt, and we're in Nevada. I'm assistant professor over at UNLV in the Department of Psychology. I did my PhD at University of California, Davis, and that's where I first started looking at problem gambling. I was funded through Asian American Center on Disparities Research, and we had a sizable grant to look at problem gambling in the Asian American communities. I always knew, being Asian American, that there was something there. There's some problems there. And so it's been very, very fruitful to do the research on it. Now I am a director at UNLV Gambling and Addictions and Marginalized Experience Lab, where we look at risk factors for problem gambling. And in another line of research, we look at subtle forms of discrimination, but that's for another conference. If I look tired, I am. I'm a new mom to a very active little boy, and he has not slept through the night. So I do miss sleep, and that is why I have 6 of my wonderful students to do my presentation for me. For most of them, as Carol was saying, this is their first rodeo, first presenting at a conference, and also maybe the first conference. So be nice. But ask them questions. I'm actually going to have a microphone over there taking pictures. I'm very proud. But if you have any pressing questions, definitely jump on the mic, ask, and I'll be there as a safety blanket for them if they're not able to answer those questions. They're an amazing group, and it's been really nice being part of shaping their career. So don't scare them too much. I know that they're trying to calm their nerves right now. We've divided up the presentation into 3 different projects, all looking at emerging adults. And I really like what Dr. Feeney found last, what he presented last presentation on emerging adults, 18 to 25. This is a very critical time for individuals. Lots of transitional milestones. You're going in and out of jobs, in and out of relationships. Most of them are in emerging adulthood right now, so they know. Research shows that they experiment a lot with substances and other maladaptive risky behaviors during this time. Also, research shows that they're at very high risk to develop serious mental illness. And then the rates of seeking treatment are pretty low for this group. So definitely a vulnerable population to look at. The first presentation will look at gender differences and gambling involvement. And we defined gambling involvement into 2 different levels. Engagement, whether or not they have gambled. And then if they have gambled, do they have problems with gambling? And why we do this in research is to look at prevention factors and also intervention factors. We examine these factors for prevention and intervention. The second presentation, we're looking at ethnic differences in problem gambling. So spoiler alert, Asian Americans are having not more gambling necessarily, but more problems with gambling. And then the third presentation, and I took a little chance on this one, this study is on video games and the relationship between video games and problem gambling. And we definitely found something very interesting in terms of what is explaining why there's a relationship between video game addiction and problem gambling. Before I introduce them, I did put them through the grinder in terms of statistics. So this is a mediation model They're all mediation models, meaning that we're just looking at why these differences are happening, okay? Without further ado, here's Maria and Rebecca to present to you all on gender differences and problem gambling.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. It is a pleasure to be here, and I will be doing the introduction to you on the study that does look at gender differences among emerging adults and problem gambling. Emerging adulthood can be a very unstable period, and review of the literature says that this time gives rise to maladaptive attitudes such as insecurities, depression, and even neuroticism. And similar research also demonstrates how negative coping in this group can be seen with avoidance, suppression of feelings, and escapism. I do feel compelled to share with you all that insecure attachment surfaced as a mediator for maladaptive behavior and maladaptive coping strategies as seen in emerging adults. You may have heard of the ACE studies, and those adverse childhood experiences predict substance use disorders with great accuracy. Having said this, we all know that a key to addictive behaviors is seen in adolescence. For example, one study reported that, is there a problem with the microphone? Oh, sorry. My biggest fear, I was gonna forget the slides. Okay. For example, one study reported that 90% of nicotine addicts reported to consuming their first nicotine before their 18th birthday. Now that is 9 out of 10, so this number spotlights how really critical this time period is for the addiction process to take hold in emerging adults. Other research also shows that learning in emerging adulthood is still robust, and addiction is a form of learning. The process of becoming addicted will use the same molecular biology as does regular learning. This making this emerging adulthood population even more vulnerable to addictions. Overall, there is an exuberant amount of literature on the male to female gambling comparison, and it says what many of us already know, and it was overwhelming that men gamble more frequently, they have higher losses and wins, that men will engage in games of strategy like sports betting and table games, where women will gravitate towards slots and bingo. Men also will gamble for more novel-seeking or sensation-seeking experiences, where women will gamble to relieve dysphoric feelings like depression. One last factor that we found in other studies for young adult gambling is having a disposable income of $50 or more. So, in supporting literature, we found several mediators as to why problem gambling is occurring in higher rates in males, and one of them which was testosterone. So higher levels of testosterone are responsible for more sensation-seeking and more risk-taking, which in turn is leading to higher gambling rates. And then there was another study on impulsivity, and the researchers looked at rats. And they found that female rats had more impulsive choice, which was problems delaying gratification, where the male rats had more impulsive action, which was stopping or controlling behavior. We also looked at risk-taking in other studies, and risk-taking is peaking at around ages 18 to 20, and it is higher rates in males. This is displayed with higher rates of impaired driving and risky sex. With the impaired driving, males are reported to having drive impaired 10% more than females, which only reported impaired driving 3%, so it's quite a difference. So why are these differences in the sexes? And one study suggested that it was an evolutionary theory that men are programmed to take more risks in order to have more reproductive success, and females were programmed to take less risk in order to protect their offspring. So we do see that gambling can equal like a modern day masculinity, where some research have found in a supporting study that men who engage in sports betting and table games showed higher levels to conformity, of masculine conformity, than the males that preferred playing slot machines. So in our study, what we looked at were 3 mediating factors. The first one being impulsivity. Impulsivity is a hallmark for both substance use disorders and behavioral addictions, and is defined with acting without contemplation for future consequences, or just having a total lack of insight. Aspects of impulsivity are sensation-seeking and impulsive coping. Sensation-seeking being something like skydiving. The second mediator that we looked at was the belief in luck. Now that's interesting. It has a few different components, one of which is it's just basically felt, it's commonly is just held as a favorable or poor outcome of a chance event on an individual. It can have superstition or it cannot. It's not required to be superstitious. And the third mediating factor we looked at was risk-taking. Now that's doing something that involves danger or risk in order to achieve a certain goal. In other words, risk is the possibility of losing something of value. Risky behaviors often seen in the behaviors I already discussed, like impaired driving, risky sex, and drug use. So in our study, we asked 2 research questions. Do emerging adult males gamble more and have higher rates of problem gambling compared to females? And if this is happening, what are the risk factors accounting for this differences? And I will introduce to you now Maria. She'll just go over the results and methods portion.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Maria. I was born and raised in Europe. One of my future goals includes learning how to say Nevada the right way. I promise working on it. So I would like to thank you all wonderful folks for having us here. I do appreciate this opportunity to present to you, and thank you, Carol, for that. As Rebecca shared with you, gambling is fastly becoming a public health problem in the United States, especially among emerging adults. Some states have lowered their gambling age to 18 years old. And in turn, the gambling industry has recently oriented their market to target this younger population. However, little is known about the gender variation and the factors placing emerging adults at risk for getting engaged and developing problems in gambling. The purpose of the study was to determine the risk factors accounting for the gender differences at the 2 levels of gambling involvement: engagement, gambled versus never gambled, and problems gambling. Thank you, I got it, I promise. I promise, I'm a stud, I got it. Okay. Therefore, we examined first the gender differences at the 2 levels of gambling involvement, and if different aspects of impulsivity, risk-taking, and belief in luck mediated or accounted for gender differences in gambling. So as you can see, the measures we used: gambling engagement, so lifetime variable, has the individual ever gambled? We measured also problem gambling by using the South Oaks gambling screen revised for adolescents. Problem gambling was assessed with this screen because this screen has been one of the most frequently used problem gambling screens for young adults. The SOGS-RA is a lifetime measure of the amount of negative consequences in various life domains for respondents as a result of their gambling behavior. Participants completed a demographic questionnaires and a self-report measure. We also measured aspects of impulsivity through the use of the UPS impulsivity scale. As you can see, the impulsivity scale consists of impulsive coping, which refers to an impulsive coping style focused on engagement in impulsive behaviors in the face of negative affect defined as impulsive coping. We also looked at sensation seeking, which refers to both the tendency to enjoy activities that are exciting and the openness to try new experiences that may be dangerous. We also assessed risk-taking by using the risk-taking subscale from Jackson Personality Inventory. Risk-taking refers to the tendency to tolerate the possibility of great losses to obtain great material or psychological gain. Our sample included 946 college students respondents. In this sample, 485 identified as female, which are 51% of the total sample, and 461 identified as male, which is 49%. Participant ages ranged from 18 to 25 years old, which is emerging adults range. Participants were recruited from the psychology subject pools at a large West Coast university. And our results. A major focus of the study was to test if certain risk factors could account for the gender differences in gambling engagement and problems gambling. Therefore, our mediation analyses were conducted to test whether certain risk factors significantly mediated these gender differences. We ran a multiple mediation analysis, which revealed that first, gender differences do exist in both gambling engagement and problem gambling among emerging adults. And second, risk-taking accounted for these gender differences in both gambling engagement and problem gambling among emerging adults. Furthermore, we found that emerging adult men appear to exhibit more risk-taking attitudes and behaviors. They're also twice as likely to engage in gambling and almost 3 times as likely to develop gambling problems. We accounted for the covariates of age, race, and nationality, leaving gender as the main independent variable we wanted to focus on. We found that gender is significantly related to gambling engagement as well as problem gambling. Our study showed no gender differences for belief and luck. But then there is a significant relationship between the belief in luck and gambling engagement, which means that people who do believe in luck do engage more in gambling. Our study also shows gender differences in sensation seeking, where men score higher on sensation seeking and gambling engagement. All 3 mediators, risk-taking came out as a significant one, explaining the gender differences in gambling engagement, with men engaging more than women. In other words, men took more risks than women and were more likely to engage in gambling. As we did with gambling engagement, we accounted for the covariates, age, race, and nationality, leaving gender as the main factor we wanted to focus on when examining problem gambling. Again, gender is related to problem gambling as well as it was with gambling engagement. Even though path A in compulsive coping and path B showed significance, our study showed that impulsive coping does not affect problem gambling. Women are more impulsive copers, and impulsive coping is positively related to problem gambling, but it was not a significant relationship. Belief in luck did not show significant pathways and was not a significant mediator. Risk-taking, on the other hand, is once again a significant mediator for the gender differences in problem gambling, with men having more problems than women. Men took more risks than women, once again, and the greater the risk-taking the individual tended to be, the more problems with gambling. Main take-home point is that risk-taking is a major factor accounting for the gender differences in gambling engagement and problem gambling. It is not only more socially acceptable for men to take more risks, but it's also socially expected of men to do so early in life. Research shows that men who take more risks are seen as more successful and therefore more attractive and more capable of providing resources for the family. The study found that risk-taking seems to be a major risk factor, in accounting for gender differences in both levels of gambling involvement. Emerging adults seem to engage in more gambling and have more gambling problems because of their tendency to take more risks than women. As clinicians, we would like to build awareness and address this in therapy with the individual we're working with. The findings have a number of important implications for intervention programs targeting emerging adults. Most counseling programs do not address gambling problems for for emerging adults. However, these findings suggest that it may be useful to routinely consider gambling issues and problems when assessing emerging adults for mental health problems. It appears that counseling programs should assess for high level of risk-taking among emerging adults and develop interventions for effectively reducing risk-taking. However, creating programs to target risk-taking may be challenging, given that risk-taking is a key aspect of masculinity for emerging adults. Future research should explore risk-taking more, and as well as how masculinity plays a part in it. Perhaps intervention programs could focus on helping men redefine risk-taking and masculinity in a more socially responsible way. There is clearly a need for counseling programs and staff to develop more assessment and treatment skill proficiencies specifically designed to address the increasing problem among emerging adults. Thank you very much. If you don't have any questions, or if you do, you can show them now. If you don't, I would like to invite Kelly and Tony to present our next presentation.
All right, already obtained my primary goal of not tripping on my way up here, so thank you. I would like to thank the Queen who talked about her college paper. We're going to discuss actually more gambling in college campuses, so you just led right into it. If you want to take my script, you can actually speak. So my name is Kelly Kim. I am here with my partner, Anthony King, and we are going to discuss ethnic differences in problem gambling for emerging adults. So, as we see that there are differences present between gender and problem gambling, we also see differences in ethnicity and problem gambling as well. Problem gambling is prevalent amongst all ethnic groups here within the United States. However, we do see that there's a bigger problem gambling issue amongst Asian Americans. Asian Americans are often seen as the high rollers of the gambling community, especially in hubs here in Las Vegas. You often see marketing campaigns with various Asian, specifically East Asian characters targeted towards them to market them into the gambling community. Prior studies regarding ethnic differences in problem gambling are inconsistent, and the reason why we conducted this study was to gain some consistency when it came to this. Now, focusing on the college student population, it was estimated by researchers that approximately 75% of college students have gambled in the past 12 months. Now, in essence, 3 in 4 college students have gambled in the past year, and this is legally or illegally. This is an interesting statistic, considering only 22% of universities have some kind of formal policy on gambling. With gambling clearly present in these young adults, you would think that there are more policies regarding this. However, nearly all universities have some kind of formal policy in regards to alcohol usage and drinking on campus. Let's take a closer look at that. If we take a closer look, we find that college students who gamble actually have higher risks of binge drinking and unsafe sex after drinking compared to their non-gambling counterparts. With that in mind, you would expect more formal policies in place. According to studies conducted by Dipali Rinker and her team, we find that Asian students were found to gamble actually less frequently than their Caucasian and Latina counterparts. Asian students gambled on average about 6 days, the least frequent, with Caucasians the most frequent with 9 days. You would hypothesize that more frequent gambling would then lead to more risky behavior. However, we actually find that Asian American students lose on average up to $2,000 more than their non-Asian ethnic groups. With that in mind, we can see that Caucasians, though they do gamble more, they don't lose as much. When examining problem gambling, one symptom for diagnosis that you've seen before is lying to your friends and family about how much you gamble. It's actually found that Asian students lied the most about their losses when it came to their gambling. Compared to Caucasian, Black, African American, Hispanic, and Latinas, Asian American students lied the most about their losses, felt the most guilty about their gambling, felt that they could not stop gambling, argued with the people they lived with about their gambling, lost time from work or school due to gambling, and had a larger family history of problem gambling compared to the non-Asian ethnic groups. These Asian students do not want to feel ashamed and want to uphold that upstanding student reputation. This is a very widely known conception among Asian Americans that's known as the saving face concept. This concept is upholding one's reputation and honor. These students don't want their closest friends and families to know too much about their gambling, specifically with their losses. Due to the fact that saving face is such an integral part of specifically Asian culture, it would make sense why these Asian students actually lie the most when it comes to their gambling. Asian students also make up a larger portion of students who meet the criteria for pathological gambling in comparison to students who are white, African American, Black, Hispanic, and Latinas. Rinker and her colleagues have then suggested with their 2016 study that Asians may gamble less frequently. Although they gamble less frequently, they do lose the most. This infrequency of gambling, accompanied by higher losses, can be seen as potential binge behavior and incredibly problematic depending on the individual's given financial situation. With the information from prior literature analyzed, our study objectives are to 1, examine if ethnic differences exist in problem gambling for emerging adults, and 2, if differences do exist, identify factors that account for these variations in the problem gambling. To gain these results, we had participants complete self-report questionnaires, specifically the UPPSP Impulsive Behavior Scale, the South Oaks Gambling Screen revised for adolescents that you've seen prior, the SOGSCRA, and of course the Gambling Social Network Questionnaire. Items on the social gambling questionnaire included questions such as, do you gamble to be more social, and do you gamble to do an activity with the whole entire family? You would note that this question regarding socializing with the family becomes increasingly interesting when we find that Asian Americans have a higher rate of problem gambling with their family. The participants were broken down into these demographics. We can see that the 3 ethnic groups that showed the most statistically significant results were Asian/Pacific Islander, Latinos, and whites. There were 455 individuals in the sample of Asian Pacific Islanders. That accounts for 48.1%, 136 Latinos, 14.4%, and 355 white individuals. That is 37.5%, for a total of 946 individuals in the sample. Some covariates that we examined were gender and whether the individual was US born or not. Here we see that 51.3% of the sample is female and 48.7% male. When asked if they were born in the United States or not, 77.3% answered yes, and 22.7% answered no, they were not. We asked them in the past 12 months, have you gambled? And we see that 50.5% of them answered yes, 49.5% answered no. Gambling activities include the lottery, card games, and sports betting. And after conducting these analyses, we were able to conclude with the following results that Tony will discuss with you.
All right, so after we analyzed the participants' responses, our data revealed that an individual's ethnic background was not a significant predictor for initial engagement in gambling-related behaviors. However, ethnicity was shown to be a highly significant variable related to problem gambling symptomology within our emerging adult sample when age, gender, and immigration status was controlled for in the statistical analysis using SPSS software. So furthermore, the participants in the study identifying as Asian American reported substantially more issues associated with problem and pathological gambling as compared with Hispanics and whites, as shown in the red and blue in these pie charts. With the pathological rates for Asians seen in blue, more than tripling the figures associated with the other ethnic groups in the study. To simplify these figures down even more, the data from this study displayed that nearly 1 out of 4 Asian Americans between the ages of 18 to 25 reported at least 2 or more symptoms of problem gambling. And around 1 out of every 20 Asians in our sample were classified as pathological gamblers based on their responses to the adolescent version of the South Oaks gambling screen. These specific findings concerning Asian Americans are consistent with the previous literature in this arena, which has identified young adults with an Asian ethnic background as being particularly vulnerable to gambling-related struggles. So this noticeable trend in our data regarding Asian Americans prompted us to further investigate exactly what social and cultural factors may be contributing to some of these risky gambling behaviors that appear to be quite prevalent. So in trying to account for some of these significant ethnic differences, we used a multi-mediation analysis to examine the degree of influence that impulsive coping, believing in luck, and risk-taking each have on Asian Americans' high rates of problem and pathological gambling. For those of you who haven't taken statistics recently, I'll try to avoid getting too heavy into the mathematical jargon here. Instead, I'd like to focus on the different relationships we're seeing within this model. I'll go line by line to make it as translatable as possible. So using the same covariant controls, we first analyzed the relationship between the Asian ethnicity and risk-taking. This calculation, shown in the bottom line, did not reveal any statistical significance, meaning that Asian Americans within our sample did not appear to be any more inclined towards risky decision-making than any other ethnicity. However, there was a significant relationship between risk-taking alone and being a problematic gambler, which makes a lot of sense based on some of the information presented in the last group on gender differences. Moving up to the next line involving a belief in luck, we found that having an Asian ethnic background was strongly related to conceptualizations involving good fortune. Yet the relationship between just believing in luck and being a problem gambler was shown to be quite insignificant. Or to state it differently, simply having a belief in luck does not appear to make someone more prone to experiencing a gambling disorder. And finally, moving on to the last mediator in this model, impulsive coping, seen at the very top there, this factor was revealed to be the game changer in our analyses. This data supported the idea that emerging adults identifying as Asian were more susceptible to impulsive styles of coping, and further, that this particular form of coping had significant connection to gambling disorder symptomology. So to kind of condense all that information from the model down to just a few key points here, the study found that Asian Americans within the age range of 18 to 25 had significantly higher rates of problem and pathological gambling as compared to other Hispanic and white Americans within the same age group. The mediator variable that best accounted for these ethnic differences was impulsive coping, due to the highly significant relationship that it had with both the Asian ethnicity and problematic gambling behaviors. Moreover, based on participant responses, Asian Americans within our sample report having much more extensive social networks that included many others struggling with gambling-related behaviors. This result was not shown in the previous models, but may be helpful in further explaining this relationship between Asian students and gambling troubles nonetheless. Throughout the different levels of the social hierarchy, Asian Americans continually report knowing someone around them that was struggling with gambling in some form or another, from their peers all the way to their grandparents. Interestingly, mothers of Asian Americans were reported as having the most issues with gambling, whereas for Hispanic participants, parental gambling problems were more closely associated with fathers instead, at least according to our data in the sample. So that brings me to the discussion portion of the study. Since our data revealed only Asian Americans in emerging adulthood to have a significant relationship to both problem and pathological gambling, we wanted to discuss some of the possible clinical steps that could be implemented to better help this community. The first step may be to start encouraging routine screenings for gambling addiction during normal checkups for those in this 18 to 25 age group identifying as Asian. Also, since there is a significant link between Asian Americans and impulsive coping, and impulsive copers typically have more problems with gambling, a clinical focus on improving the management of emotions and increasing overall emotional intelligence for the specific group may potentially lead to an increase in healthier gambling behaviors. Future research should focus on identifying the different roles of positive and negative forms of coping and which type is contributing more to this prevalence of gambling disorders within young Asian Americans. For the purposes of our calculations, we did not separate impulsivity into positive and negative categories, but this type of analysis may be useful to clinicians attempting to further understand the underlying mechanisms contributing to these problematic behaviors. And lastly, I just want to mention a couple limitations of our study and areas where others may be able to improve based on their population of available participants. The most apparent limitation of our study was that all participants were from one large West Coast university. This has been a common issue for many previous studies in this field and is largely related to practicality for the most part, but it may also help to account for many of the inconsistencies in the previous literature. Future researchers should attempt to go beyond just the limits of one college campus and collect data from a national sample. in order to gather the most representative data possible. Another limitation of our study that is somewhat related to the first is we did not collect data from a non-student population, and we're confined to the usual pool of undergraduate participants, which is common for many university studies. More information is needed in this area to fully grasp the relationship between emerging adulthood and problematic gambling. Non-student data, while harder to obtain, may give us greater insights for better understanding the student population's gambling behaviors, or vice versa, as well as collecting more data on other ethnicities than the three we focused on for this study. This could possibly help identify other vulnerable ethnic groups or specific mediators contributing to these gambling disorders within young adults. So that concludes our discussion on ethnic differences in gambling. If anyone out there is interested more in this work or would like to collaborate with Dr. Wong in the future in some form or another, I encourage you to reach out to her.